to wake everyone up, to get us going, I'm going to do a little bit of trivia. So anybody recognize any of the numbers? We'll start with the top of the chart. Somebody tell me what the first number is.
Overall budget.
Overall what? Budget? Wow, that would be a... Okay, I'm trying to get everybody going after lunch. So the first number is the number of projects. No, not quite. Not quite. Number of projects. Probably more projects than that exist. Project management. No, none of these numbers have to do, except maybe one of them has, to do with projects or project management. So the first number on the chart is the number of websites as of January, beginning of this year. I'm going to do a snapshot. Number of active live websites. What about the next one? This is a company we all use. Many of you probably use today. Google. And so what is this?
Cash.
Profit? Close? Sorry? Net worth? Oh, no way.
The advertising spent.
Advertising spent? No. Somebody else want to just take a... This is Google's first quarter revenue. This is what they make every 3 months. $100 per minute.
Okay.
Bill Gates? Big pop? No. The next one has to do with the amount of video uploaded to YouTube. 14.5 million per hour. Pictures, very good. Pictures what? Pictures uploaded to Facebook. What about the next one? 189 million, and it has to do with this thing. Nope.
Mobile devices.
Close? Again with Facebook. Facebook has 189 million mobile users. All right, 2 members per second. Another social network. No. LinkedIn. How fast LinkedIn is growing. What about the next one? Another social network. Sorry? Gary? 55 to 64 is the fastest growing demographic using Twitter. Okay, 9. Let me see if I remember what 9 is. 9 has to do with Pinehurst. Number of golf courses. Very good. 17 feet, 7 inches.
Snow.
This has to do with Florida.
Wave.
Say that again. Highest point, no. Close.
Large crocodile.
This is a lady who came home from work, walked into her house, and she put, yes, a snake, 17 feet, sitting in her living room. I said I would have put the sell sign up. Right after that, 50 to 70%. IT money wasted. This is being recorded, right? Okay. 50 to 70%. This has to do with the topic today. The average number of projects that fail. 50 to 70% of projects that fail. Okay? So, welcome to Just Enough Project Management. I'll give you a second to go through that for those of you who haven't seen it. Well, you'll have it in the presentation, and you can do whatever you want. So, is this pretty accurate? You think? And I know this is probably, so you can see how the customer explained it and what the customer really needed. Totally look a lot different from, you know, the initial set of requirements, right? And so this is kind of funny, but if we talk about projects, you know, projects get pretty serious, right? You know, you even have to go in front of Congress sometimes, depending on the size of the project and the impact. Anybody know what project this is related to? What happened to that project? Okay, we won't go down that road. Okay. All right. Here's another one. So these things, you know, projects can they can make the newspaper, right? I mean, depending on the size, the scope, how much money is going down the tube on these kinds of projects. What about this one? $1 billion. A lot of money, isn't it? So what's the problem with all these things? Anybody want to? Why do projects fail? Poor management.
Poor communication.
Communications.
Or plan.
Poor planning.
No testing.
What was that?
No testing.
No testing. All of these, all right? So what about lack of governance? Anybody have this issue? What about unclear expectations? You ever start a project without a scope? I've started many projects without a scope. By the way, we're running a little bit behind time, so I didn't get a chance to introduce myself because I was kind of rushing. So my name is Greg Maron with Durham County Government. Been with Durham County Government now for, I guess, about 16 months. And prior to that, I spent the last 10 years in higher ed. And prior to that, I spent 25 plus years in the private sector. So, I worked on many projects. You know, spent many years with IBM, and IBM had their own project management philosophy and project management guidelines. And I've seen projects of all sizes, from millions of dollars to hundreds of millions of dollars, just go, oh, well, we'll do it better next time. What about lack of fact-based analysis? I see some heads nodding. I think I heard this one, right? Poor communications. These are all common themes, common symptoms that make projects. What about changes in project size, budget, and scope?
Scope creep.
Scope creep. What about budgets? You want the project done, but you only have so much budget to get it done with, right? We're going to talk a little bit about this one a little bit more. What about internal politics? This one was the real reason for the, the healthcare. There's a lot of internal politics going on. Caused that to be a disaster on day one. Big embarrassment for the president. Can you imagine doing that to your county manager or city manager?
I was going to say, hasn't it always been that way with the president and Congress and all that good stuff?
Internal politics plays a big role, yes. So that brings us to our agenda for today. What I'm going to try to get through in the time remaining is four items. One, we're going to just talk a little bit more about projects and project management itself. Look at the basic project management life cycle. Give you some secrets in terms of where time is spent on project management today. And then we'll finish up by, if we have time, hopefully, talking a little bit about some tools and practices that you can use to help manage projects that you're working on. So let's start with top 10 reasons not to use project management. If I had time, I would go through all of them. I'd do a David Letterman sort of, top 10. So number 10. Does this ring a bell for anyone? All right. What about that one there? And I'm going to skip down to number 1. It costs too much to do project management. All right. Actually, one of the companies I worked at, got this thing if I can't keep a job, but I worked at SAS for a little while, and believe it or not, project management is something that's fairly new to SAS. You know, this is a company that's been around for many, many years, but only within the last 5 years or so have they really formalized project management. And it came about as a result of so many project failures. You know, deadlines being missed, scope creep, budget overruns, you name it. So I give you a whole list of top 10 reasons why you might not want to use project management. Not going to go through all of that. I went through 3 of those, but that will be in the presentation. So let's talk about what a project is. And what I've found is that many people, you know, sometimes we get into debates about what a project is. Does anybody have a different definition of what a project is than what we're looking at? Something that's temporary, it's unique, and it has a start date and it has an end date. One place I worked, they had over 100 projects, but none of them had end dates. They just went on and went on and went on. Matter of fact, before I came down to Pinehurst, we had a CIP review meeting. We were talking about capital projects, and one of the complaints that the CFO had was that there were projects that have been open for 8, 9, 10 years. And he was challenging our folks we got to bring projects to a close. We can't keep them open and can't keep running back and saying, I need money to do more on this project. So a lot of times, that third bullet, definite beginning and definite end, is not there. It's not clear associated with the project. When does the project end? And not everything is a project. This is Gartner's definition. And so Gartner uses a chart that says, you know, if it's high risk, then it gets treated through a project management framework or project management methodology. If it's low risk, then it may be just a task, or it may be just managed work. As an example, updating a server with the latest, patches. Is that a project? That would not be considered a project, right? Does anybody have any different classifications of how you classify projects? Do you have small, medium, and large? Some places have small projects, medium projects, and large projects based upon what? Size of budget. Some have mandatory projects, right? Things that come down that are mandatory, regulatory driven. Some have projects that are, driven by department heads, and some may have internal projects. So different classifications of how you might classify projects. So after you classify projects, then you may have someone who runs, who pulls all of this together, right? We use the term project manager, but it may not necessarily be a role within the organization. It may just be something that's added to your daily job to coordinate, pull together, serve as project manager on a project. And when we talk about project manager, some key traits or key responsibilities is that they're the person to sort of serve as the integrator, right? They're the person to work with, the client, to work with the applications team if necessary, to work with the server team if necessary. You might have 2 or 3 vendors. They're responsible for pulling it all together. They have that integration role. And you see on the right side of the chart is some key skills required. And one of the strongest ones on the chart, one of the major ones is strong communication skills. Why is that important? Keep everybody on the same page, exactly. Keep everyone on the same page and be able to talk to the stakeholders, right? Because on any project you have different stakeholders. So you need someone with strong communication skills that can talk to all of the different stakeholders on a project. So, what's the problem with project management? Why do 50 to 70% of projects fail? Well, one is it's considered what? Overhead, right? Extra work, too much paperwork. Who wants to keep up with, spreadsheets and Gantt charts and risk charts and task lists and project charters, and I can go all the way down the list. Just a lot of paperwork, right? It's kind of stuffy, a lot to be done. It's really kind of boring, right? But in reality, too much project management can be all of that. It really can be boring if you think about it. One of the things we're going to talk about is the project management life cycle. And if you look at PMI is an organization that certifies project managers, and they have, they have some, which we'll get into a little bit, some 47 different processes associated with project management. And each of those processes have an input, an output, 10 knowledge areas. And so if you add all of that up, it's just overwhelming, right? And so the key to project management is balancing, having a balance of what you should do with what really needs to be done. How many would consider themselves we use on a scale of 1 to 5, 3 above in terms of an organization that executes project management very well? Show of hands. Okay. That's why we're here. Okay. All right. Very good. So the key with project management is to pick and choose those things that that works for your department, right? What works for Durham County may not necessarily work for another county. And so I'm going to take you through quite a bit. You can get through the charts. But the things I take you through, again, it may not necessarily, all of those things may not necessarily work for your organization. So let's talk about the basic project management life cycle. And what do we mean by the life cycle? We're talking about now what a project goes through, right? From beginning, from the initial conversation, concept, through closing of the project. Project is done. Now, is a project done when it goes into production? No way. Far from done. Far from done. And this is another one that catches us, particularly those organizations who are really kind of just starting in this area, right? And we'll get into that a little bit more. And this is, as I said before, Project Management Institute defines these 5 processes. And they have 47 different processes associated with each of these processes across what they call 10 knowledge areas. Knowledge areas being things like cost management, budget management, communications management, stakeholder management, etc., etc. There's a nice little quick read, a book called Just Enough Project Management, and I have the author there on the slide. It's a quick read, provides a great overview of project management, and it doesn't take you through all of those different things that PMI would take you through. And so, if you have time and you really want to improve your abilities to manage your projects more effectively, more efficiently, I would suggest that you read that book. They talk about the project life cycle using, basically they talk about 4 processes: initiate, plan, control, and close. And so we're going to walk through what each of those phases of the project management life cycle are. So when we talk about initiating, we're really talking about what is the challenge or what is the problem. And initiating, that is the phase where we're really trying to simply understand what is it we need to do. And do we have the capacity to do it? That's all the initiating phase is. What is it we need to do? Do we have the capacity? Do we have everything we need to do to complete the project? That's what initiating phase is all about. Planning is how should we go about doing it. Now this is a tricky one because I've been places where I say, okay, can you provide me with the project plan? And what do you think I get when I ask that question? I get blank stares sometimes. Crickets. When you ask for a project plan, what do you typically get back? Project timeline, exactly. Spreadsheet, right? Maybe it might be a Gantt chart, but I submit to you that's not a project plan. And normally when I'm asking for a project plan, that is not the thing I'm looking for. Right? I'm looking for the document that talks about all four of those processes, all in one nice package document. It tells me how I'm going to get through initiating, through controlling, planning, and closing the entire project management life cycle. That's the project management plan. And so control is, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on control because that's what we do well. Control is really executing, right? And then closing is finishing the job. How do we celebrate the success? If the project didn't go as well, what do we do? And these are some of the outputs. So one of the main outputs of the initiating phase of a project is something called a project charter. Okay? So a project charter is, it could be a one-page, it could be a half a page. But it just simply summarizes what we think the project is all about. And I'll give you an example of a project charter in a little bit. Planning we get into, the pretty Microsoft Office Gantt charts, something called a work breakdown structure, task list, resource leveling, who's going to be on the project, who's going to do what, etc., etc. Again, all of that data would be in the what? In the project management plan, right? In the control phase, some of the outputs, things like, again, task list, issues list, bugs list, what the deliverables are. You might even have something called a risk issue log. And then the closing, whatever the closeout documents are. So when we work on projects, how many of you make your clients sign off at the close of a project? Yeah, the client should sign off, right? The client should sign off saying, project done, right? If you were buying a house, somebody was building a new house for you, they go through an inspection and you have to do what? You have to sign off, right? Same thing. Okay, so let's talk about the big secret and then we're going to get into some tools. So this is where time is typically spent in working with projects. Anybody see anything wrong with this chart? Not balanced? See, the executing is the stuff we do well, right? I'm a new project. I'm going to move from on-premise email to Office 365. So that's a project. So I'm ready to get rolling, right? I'm ready to start talking about technical requirements. I'm ready to jump into the executing stage, right? Start talking about technical requirements and security and all of that great stuff. The problem with that chart is that this is really where time should be spent. Not enough time is typically spent in the initiating, controlling, closing, and planning. So the secret is that for many of our projects, which are smaller projects, where we really want to spend time, and if there's any takeaway from today, is that you want to spend more time in the initiating, planning, and closing phase of the project management lifecycle. This is where projects go from success to either dissatisfaction or complete failure. Because we did not take the time in the initiating and the planning phase to really understand the project. So why are these the most important areas? Well, in the initiating phase, remember we talked about something, one of the outputs from the initiating phase. So one of the outputs from the initiating phase is what? The project charter. That is really your contract with the client, right? How many of you start a project without having a contract in place? And you go back and they say, well, you know, I really wanted, well, can you add this? All right? So, I learned many years ago that it's important that when you, particularly with clients, department heads, is that you pin them down and you make them sign not only the closing document, but you make them sign the project charter. Because the project charter says exactly what it is we're going to do. And if there's any deviation from that, then I put the charter back in front and we have a conversation regarding how we deviate away from that. The point of planning, right? The point of planning is not to follow the plan, but to, again, drill down and really start to understand the requirements. What needs to be done. That's the whole point of planning. Is to really drill down now, to take the charter and to put, remember what I said, the charter is just kind of a one-page document. So now when you go through planning, you're going to put more meat on that bone, right? You're gonna really start to add more detail to the charter. And as I said before, closing is important because go live is not the end of a project. You might be working with vendors. There may be contracts that are open that need to be closed. There may be vendors that need to be paid. You go down the list, right? There are different things that may be required to close out to officially say you're done with that project. And when you're done with the project, it now moves from what? It now moves into what? So I often get this question. What happens when you're done with the project?
It goes into operation.
Administration.
Yeah, exactly. It moves into operations. And so what happens is once it moves into operation, it's now just like any other application or service that your organization provides. So if there's a problem, that should probably go to your service desk or to your help desk to then deal with that problem. So one of the things in the planning phase is how are you going to support the project once it moves into operations? I have been on many teams where we've worked on a project, we've moved it into operations, and guess what? The help desk said, okay, how do I support this? Where's the documentation? What do I do when I get a call? All of those kinds of things that should come out during the what? During the planning phase of the project. Okay? So let's talk about some tools. So we talked about project sponsor. Who's the project sponsor? Depends. Could be a department head, county manager. This is important. I don't take on a project unless I know exactly who the project sponsor is. And normally, at least in the private sector, you know because it's the person with the purse string. That's the sponsor, right? And that's the person who signs the what? The project charter, okay? These are just some things that you want to really go through during the initiation phase. So project charter key, project sponsor key, sign off by the project sponsor. If the project sponsor is not on board, do not start the project. You must have the project sponsor on board. I've been through a couple of ERP implementations when there was no project sponsor. You know, ERP implementations are $1 million projects with no sponsor. So as I said before, project charter is addressing these kinds of things, risks, and you're addressing them at sort of a high level, right? You're not getting into a whole lot of detail. And the reason for that is because your project charter may be a document, you can't see that, but when you get the notes, you'll be able to look at that a little closer. This is just simply an Excel template that you fill in, right? It has an overview of the project, where the budget is coming from, some high-level things associated with what's in scope, right? You need to know what's in scope. So before you can put the project charter together, you need a what? What's the input for a project charter? You need some kind of requirements document, right? Could be an email. You know, it could be just simply an email, right? That's an example of a project charter. That's a one-pager that I used many moons ago in higher ed department, right? President didn't have a whole lot of time. All he wanted to see at the time was just something on one page. Very simple. All right? What are the deliverables? First of all, what's the goal and purpose of this project? What are you going to deliver? What are the constraints, whether it's time, budget? And then there was a line for signature. Because once you got that sign off, then we can start the project. Very important. We talked about planning, so now planning is saying how should we go about executing this project, putting this project together. Here we're looking at timeline, things like timeline, we're looking at costs. We're drilling down a little bit more and looking at scope. All right, we're starting now to take that one-page document and put more detail behind it. Okay, this is the planning phase. And here's where you want to really spend a lot of time, in the planning phase. Remember, this is a phase of the project that often gets, 9 times out of 10, it's bypassed. You go from an email that says, here's what I want to do, straight into executing. I like the work breakdown structure, and I stuck this in the presentation. It's a good tool because it forces the team to think about the different pieces of the project. In other words, okay, if I need to, as an example, if I need to plan a banquet, all right, I'm working on a banquet for the holiday. It gives me an opportunity to break down the big goal into smaller tasks, and then I can begin to do what? I can begin to assign resources. I can begin to ask questions. How much is, okay, the dinner? How much is the dinner going to cost us? All right? So this is called a work breakdown structure, starting with the big goal and then breaking it down into subtasks. And once you have this, you can begin to assign what? Resources. Right. This is a step that's often skipped. We often just say, Joe, I want you to work on this project. And Joe is wondering, what piece? What piece of this do you want me to work on, right? So, work breakdown structure. Project risk. Another step that's often skipped, and that is to before doing anything on the project, think about what could cause the project to go wrong. What could cause the project to go wrong, and then documenting those risks into something called a risk register. And that risk register could simply just be an Excel spreadsheet where you're keeping up with the risks that you've identified that can cause the project to go off track. And then you ask yourself, once you have identified a risk, what are you going to do about it? Are you going to accept the risk? How are you going to mitigate that risk? Are you going to accept the risk, or are you going to do something to minimize the risk? Right? So the risk register, looking at things that could cause the project to go off tracks. A lot of times, this step is skipped and only dealt with once the risk happens. As I said before, the risk register could be something as simple as an Excel spreadsheet where you identify the risk, and you might even take it a step further and assign the risk to someone to say, you have the responsibility to figure out how to mitigate this particular risk. Okay? The control phase, as I said before, now we're getting into simply monitoring the project. Is it meeting? Is it on track in terms of cost? Is it on track in terms of schedule? Is it on track in terms of resources needed to complete the project? Now, one of the big things on this chart that is often overlooked on many projects is the communications plan. That's why I said when you ask for a project plan, inside the project plan should be a communications plan. And that is, how are you going to communicate to your stakeholders? And who are your stakeholders on a project? Who are your stakeholders? Users?
Management,
The sponsor?
other departments.
Exactly, other department. And so in your communications plan, you actually identify your stakeholders. And the reason for doing that is because what I communicate to my users may not be what I communicate to my project sponsor. And I've seen that, where we put together just a blanket email, project status email, and we fire it out to everyone. Wrong approach. Identify your stakeholders and identify the kinds of communications that would work for each group of stakeholders. For instance, my manager would not respond to an email. I would have to put something on paper and deliver it. So that communications medium or mechanism for the manager is different from what I would use to communicate to the end users. So another important part here is communications. This is a part of the control. And this is where control is lost. Right? And that's why I go back to the project manager having the role of coordinating communications. Now I know I'm covering a lot, and everything I'm covering is typically the role of the project manager, is to pull all of these pieces together, working with his or her team. Communications plan, the risk register. You might even have something which I don't have in here called an issues log. How many of you, when you have an issue on a project, you track it? Right? You put it in an issues, you put it in a log, and you track it to what? You track it to closure. Okay? So just like with risk, you put your issues in an issues log and you track your issues to closure. That may not work for some organizations because many times the project manager is a team of one, or it might not even be a full FTE. Right? And so you may not have time to do all of these different things that we're talking about here. Triple constraint. Now this is important because I often get the question, what happens when the county manager calls you and they want to change something in the project? How do you deal with that? Anybody ever got a request? You're in the bottom of the 9th inning and all of a sudden, got a new requirement.
Phase 2.
Phase 2? Very good. Good. That's a good approach. Phase 2, right? Yep, we got it. We understand the requirement. And guess what? That's going into phase 2. Sometimes that doesn't work. This has saved me a lot, right? I've always, when I get those kinds of requests, I always take this with me, and I explain to the manager this thing called a triple constraint, meaning that, okay, if I change any one of these sides, understand that possibly the other 2 sides will change as well. You agree with that? All right? And so most times when you explain it in that fashion, they begin to either back off a little bit or soften up a little bit, right? So if you want to change the scope, guess what? If you want to put something in the scope that wasn't in there initially, then more than likely the schedule is going to do what? Push out. We're not going to make the date the original date, right? If you want to cut the budget, if you're okay with quality suffering a little bit or a lot, then as long as you're willing to do that, right? This is a very good conversation to have when you get into those situations where your manager, supervisor wants to, have a conversation regarding changing 1, 2, maybe all 3 sides. All right? That what happens? Quality suffers. Okay? It's called the triple constraint. Change one side, and you will affect another side or even both sides. Closing. So when we talk about closing, we're talking about handing off, right? Many times we're talking about handing off the project to the, it could be handing off something to the client they're getting ready to use. It could be looking back at lessons learned. How many of us, when we close a project, then we come together and we do a lessons learned? Quite a few hands. Very good. What if the project, we learned a nice technique. What if the project just failed? I mean, it just didn't go as planned. Do we still come together? Sure. So we still come together, right? And there's a neat little exercise you learned called writing an obituary, right? Yeah. You kind of you just get together with the team and write a nice little obituary on why the project failed, right? And in the closeout phase, you're looking at, variances. Things like whether you stayed on track, meet your budget, whether you're under budget, over budget. Same thing with schedule, same thing with scope. One of the other things that you might do, if you have, again, if you have a project manager who can coordinate all of this, is you might look at all of your project documents you collected along the way, from beginning to end. One of the things I like to do is keep all project documents in a repository associated with the project. So that if I have to do a project similar down the road 6 months from now, I can say to the project manager, go review the project documents from the last project that are in the project repository. Okay. These are things that are all part of the project closeout phase. And then one thing that we want to do that's really important is we want to celebrate the success of the project. Right? Now, we have to be careful. Right? Has anybody had this problem? You've done such a great job, right? That we're going to give you less time and less budget on the next project. So with that, hopefully I've given you some tools that you can use. Why don't we open it up for any questions that we can answer for you. So we talked about just enough project management. Key takeaways is what? Balancing, right? Balancing what the art and the science, all right? In other words, you can't just pick up a book and say, oh man, I found a great book, and I'm going to implement these 47 processes and 10 knowledge areas, and people will look at you and, what? All right? So you have to balance, and you have to pick and choose, and use only those things that will work for your department. Those are the key takeaways, because it is it's a big field. It's a lot of information in terms of that's out there that can help you with managing projects. But you really do have to pick and choose and use things that will work for you. Any challenges out there? Yes.
Not to tie too far, get too far off of the topic, but one of your first slides, when you were talking about the very beginning. So how long did it take you, with the politics, internal politics, to get a governance in place to allow all this to run smoothly? Hypothetically.
So great question, and I'm doing a little bit of that now at Durham County. For instance, we do not have a project management office in place, and we didn't have any governance. So, I'm starting with building the governance committee first. In other words, it's a group where all the department directors come together, and we have an opportunity to sit around and talk about projects, right? So that governance has to be there first. That's probably, and that could take some time. I don't anticipate having a full-fledged, running smoothly project management office in place. It probably will take 36 to 48 months. And that's having a complete project management framework that we follow across all projects and across the entire county for any project, whether it's IT related or any other project.
So with that being the case, so what are you doing in the interim?
Well, in the interim, for any projects that we're working on within the organization, within IT, I have an experienced project manager who's stepping us through the process. So at least within our organization, we're implementing the framework, much of what you've seen here. We have a project management cloud-based tool that we use to keep track of all of our projects. And we're writing reports on how to, because we have over 100 or so projects, but many of them, what I found out when I first came aboard was many of them were just simply tasks. Some was just simply managed work, and some were, quote, true projects. And so I had to go through that exercise.
I'm sorry. I'd like for you to talk more about the sponsor, because we often end up in situations where, we have people who are like the primary business interest in the result.
Yes.
They're the ones that are going to be using it, or supervising people who are using it. They're the ones that understand the business. But then we have the people that have to write the check.
Yes.
And they're two separate people, and they have different interests. Any suggestions for managing that, or?
Did everybody hear the question? Sponsor versus the person writing the check, where the money is coming from. I haven't experienced that yet. I'm sure I'll run into that soon. But when that happens, usually what happens is IT really doesn't do projects, first of all. I don't do projects, all right? In other words, the departments drive me to do something for them. So if you're the director of public health, right, and you want a project that's done, and the money might be coming from somewhere, I'm going to have you negotiate with where the money is coming from. You're going to sign off on the charter, and then you're going to say, now I'm ready for you to execute on that project. That would be my approach.
So we just need some growth in who is responsible for managing the project.
Yeah. Now, we do internal projects, right? Yeah, we do internal projects, but if, for instance, we're looking at a new for HR, on our ERP on the HR side of the house, right? And so I've made it very clear to the HR director, when you're ready, I'll give you the project charter. I expect you to sign off. And guess who will go in front of the commissioners and ask for funding? You. I will be there to support you, right? I'll be sitting in the audience, right? But this is your project. And it just so happens that you will be working with the IT organization to execute on your project.
So in that scenario, how much time do you spend up front with the HR director, per se, actually writing that project charter, making sure the decision he's making and the choice he's making for an application is the proper one in the organization from an IT perspective?
I spend a lot of time in the initiating. You remember the percentages? I probably spend more than that, right? Because a lot of it is an education as well. It's an education.
So you don't want them bringing the charter without
Exactly.
your input,
Exactly.
which we have happened.
So all of the directors know that in order to get something done, I need a project charter. Right. It's no different than when I go to HR and they say, okay, you want to change someone's salary, you have to fill out a form, right? You just can't walk in and say, change the salary, someone sits in front of the computer, da, 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 da. Usually you have to fill out a piece of paper, you have to submit it, and then HR will do their thing, right? So I'm the same way. You come to us, you have to fill out a piece of paper, and then we do our thing. That piece of paper, when it comes to projects, is something called a project charter.
What are some tools that you've had success with application-wise? You mentioned something you're using, some file-based solution. What tools have you seen that can help get people thinking in the right direction?
So there are a lot of tools out there. This question was what kind of tools. It depends on what we're talking about, right? If we're talking about doing Gantt charts, then obviously something like Excel spreadsheets is okay. Now, of course, if you want to get more advanced, then things like Microsoft Project, right? You want to get more advanced than that, there are other tools, cloud-based tools. I'll tell you, there's something called ACT, A-C-T. It's probably it's a very expensive tool, but it's probably one of the best out there. We use something called Liquid Planner. Again, a cloud-based tool. It has some APIs on the back end, so I can write any kind of reports that I want to put in front of my, my management team. Yes.
How do you handle projects that IT may not be the project manager? Where, we do a lot of construction projects. The fire department built a fire station. So we're not really the project manager, but in our department, different areas have assignments. Do you assign somebody in your department to be the primary contact, or do you have people in each area go meet with the project manager to get requirements?
So I would say to you that, in any project, there needs to be a project manager. Someone who is the person with being held accountable, right? To make sure that the project stays on track, right? And if you don't know who that person is, step number one is to make sure that that person is identified, right? Matter of fact, that's one of the things in the project charter, is to name the project's manager. So when I go to public health, I say, and when I'm working with departments, I really don't want to be the project manager. I'd rather for public health or social services or general services to assign the project manager.
Right. Yeah, we usually know who the project manager is. It's just do we pick somebody in our department to be the project manager that's going to work in our department on just pieces?
Yeah. You would have to have a liaison to work with that project manager, right? And that liaison should be someone that sort of meets some of those requirements, right? Good communication skills, someone who can integrate, work with other teams, et cetera, et cetera. You're absolutely right. Yes, sir.
So along those same lines, when you're talking about who chooses the project manager and say it's 48 months down the road, are you looking to have a PMO office type environment that
Yes.
handles strictly from an IT perspective? So you've got project managers that will be assigned whatever project, and then there's also project managers from other departments as well, or an overarching PMO office that handles all projects regardless?
So the model that I'm putting together is a PMO. There'll be a PMO, project management office, within the IT organization. And that project manager working within that function is to handle, let's say, all projects, maybe for, working with, let's say, public health. All right? So anything coming out of public health, that project manager is responsible, working with their person, right? Coordinating
Their
all.
project manager.
Exactly. Working with their project manager. Now, sometimes we do get into situations where, a business unit does not have project management folks, right? They may not even have any IT-related skills, and so they're looking for us to drive the project. That would be something else managed out of the PMO. Okay. So PMO is just a project management function that you may have within the IT organization. It may show up on the org chart as, instead of a role that someone plays, it's now a more formal team of one or two or three people who all they do is manage big projects, right? Projects that are mandatory, projects that may have a certain dollar value. Like, I'm not going to run every project through a project management process, because some projects may be a 10-day project, right? And so I'm not going to do a formal project management plan for something that costs $2,000 and it takes 10 days to get done. That would be an overkill.
Well, following along the same lines, like, what you just kind of said, I have a hard time, like, figuring out when it's just a large task.
Yes.
Or when it's a small project.
Large task versus small project. Great question. So remember the definition of a project. I always go back to the definition of a project. It's something unique. It's never been done before. We've never done it before. So always start there. Right? It's something that it's not in operations today. And so it's something unique. It has a start date, and we have to figure out when we can get it done, i.e. an end date. So always start there, right? A task may be, yep, it's something running in operations, and we know we got to get it done, new voice over IP upgrade, but I got a voice over IP system, and we're just doing an upgrade. The team knows that it's a big task, and some tasks may have to have project coordination, right? They may have to have a work breakdown structure, right? So you can apply the same tools even to tasks, right? So my operations manager, many times I will say, show me the work breakdown structure. Because I want to know specifically, have you thought through what really needs to be done, right? And what resources you are going to assign to get those tasks done. So my contact information, you have. Don't hesitate to, send me an email. If you have questions later on that you want some guidance, you want some consulting, happy to share what I know with you. I found that when I started really practicing project management, that the business of managing IT became a lot easier for me in my career. So thank you very much.
Thank you.